Adam Schiff told John Kennedy to stay silent. But Kennedy's response, delivered without venom, without even saying Schiff's name, shook the entire country in ways no one saw coming. The Senate chamber was a crucible of tension. Reporters crammed shoulder to shoulder in the press gallery, their pens poised, cameras locked on the floor below. Kennedy, Louisiana's sharp-tongued senator, had just unleashed a searing critique of a contentious spending bill, his southern drawl weaving wit and logic into a verbal blade that cut through the room's stale air. His words, laced with homespun humor, drew chuckles from some colleagues and tight-lipped frowns from others. Then came the moment that would set the nation ablaze. Adam Schiff, the influential senator from California, rose from his desk, his face a mask of resolve, his voice steady but sharp. "Senator Kennedy's rhetoric is fracturing this nation," Schiff declared, his words ringing across the hushed chamber. "For the sake of America, he should hold his tongue." The room froze, a silence so heavy it seemed to make the faint hum of the overhead lights roar. Reporters exchanged stunned glances, pens scratching furiously, one mouthing "wow" to a colleague. Did he just say that? Another whispered, her voice barely a breath. The impact was instantaneous, like a spark igniting a powder keg. Within minutes, headlines blazed across screens from New Orleans to New York. Schiff demands Kennedy's silence. Social media erupted hashtags like #KennedySpeaks and #Schiff. Silences surging as posts flooded in from every corner of the country. Some praised Schiff, arguing his call was a desperate plea for unity in a nation split by bitter debates. Others rallied behind Kennedy, seeing his unfiltered honesty as a rare antidote to Washington's polished doublespeak. In a Baton Rouge diner, a retired nurse named Ellen leaned forward in her booth, her coffee cup forgotten. "Tell Kennedy to be quiet," she muttered to her husband, her voice thick with disbelief. "That's like telling the Mississippi to stop flowing." Her husband, scrolling through his phone, shook his head. "Schiff just kicked a hornet's nest, and he's gonna get stung." In a Denver bar, college students clustered around a TV above the counter, their beers untouched as they watched the news ticker. "He's daring Kennedy to respond," said Maya, a history major, her eyes wide with anticipation. And Kennedy's not the type to back down. Schiff's challenge wasn't just another Senate dust-up. It carried a weight that reverberated far beyond the Capitol's marble halls. It wasn't a mere policy jab. It was a direct assault on Kennedy's voice, his right to speak freely in a chamber built for open debate. By evening, cable networks were replaying the exchange on an endless loop, pundits dissecting every syllable. On CNN, a commentator called Schiff's move a calculated risk that could backfire spectacularly. On a local Louisiana radio station, a caller put it more bluntly, "Schiff doesn't know who he's messing with." Kennedy's got the heart of a fighter. In homes across America, people leaned closer to their screens, sensing a showdown brewing that would define more than just a day in politics. In a small Ohio diner, a truck driver named Tom pointed at the TV, his sandwich abandoned on his plate. "You don't tell a man like Kennedy to shut up," he said, his voice low but firm. "That's not how this country works." The waitress pouring coffee nodded in agreement. "Sounds like Schiff's scared of what Kennedy might say next." Kennedy, retreating to his Senate office, sat quietly at his desk, the weight of the moment settling over him like a heavy fog. The room was modest, adorned with a few framed photos of Louisiana's bayous, their moss-draped cypress trees a quiet nod to his roots. A worn copy of the Constitution rested on a shelf, its pages marked with years of study. His staff buzzed around him, phones lighting up with calls from reporters, supporters, and even a few wary colleagues. "Senator, you've got to respond." One aide urged, holding up a tablet flashing with breaking news alerts. Another, more cautious, advised, "Let's wait, sir. Don't let Schiff set the terms of this fight." Kennedy leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping a slow rhythm on the armrest. He wasn't one for rash decisions. His mind, quick as a bayou gator, was already turning over Schiff's words, dissecting their implications. This wasn't just about him. It was about the principle of free speech, the right to call a spade in a town too often choked by platitudes. If he stayed silent, it might look like he'd folded, giving Schiff's narrative a free pass. If he spoke, it had to resonate not just for him, but for the folks back home who trusted him to be their voice in Washington. The nation was already drawing battle lines. In a Memphis community center, a group of teachers debated over their morning coffee, the air thick with the scent of brewing grounds. Kennedy's too sharp-tongued one said, stirring her cup with a frown, "Schiff's just trying to keep things civil in a country that's falling apart." Her colleague, a history teacher, shook her head. "Civil telling a senator to be quiet in the Senate. That's not democracy. That's control." In a Chicago college dorm, students crowded around a laptop, watching a clip of Schiff's statement on YouTube. "Kennedy's gonna fire back," said Jake, a political science major, a grin spreading across his face. "He's got that Louisiana grit, you know?" His roommate, scrolling through Twitter, burst out laughing. "Check these memes. Kennedy with a megaphone, Schiff with earplugs." The internet was a wildfire, with posts defending Kennedy's right to speak freely, and others backing Schiff's call for restraint. One viral tweet summed it up. "Kennedy says what we're all thinking. Schiff can't handle the truth." In Louisiana, the reaction hit closer to home, carrying a personal edge. In a Lafayette barbershop, regulars swapped stories about Kennedy's town halls, where he'd sit with farmers and fishermen, listening to their concerns with a wink and a quip that made them feel heard. "He's one of us," said a carpenter, his hair half-cut, as he gestured at the TV. "Schiff's got no business trying to muzzle him." Across town, a high school civics teacher paused her class to show the clip of Schiff's statement, her students leaning forward in their desks. "What should Kennedy do?" she asked, her voice sparking a lively debate. A student in the back raised his hand, his voice quiet but firm. "He should keep talking. People need to hear him, even if it ruffles feathers." Another, a girl near the front, added, "It's not just about Kennedy, it's about all of us having a say." The sentiment echoed across the state, where Kennedy's plain-spoken style had long struck a chord with folks who felt ignored by Washington's elite. In Washington, the press was relentless, a swarm of reporters camping outside Kennedy's office, shouting questions as his aides hurried past. Will the senator respond? One called her microphone thrust forward. Is he planning a statement? Another pressed scribbling notes. Inside, Kennedy's team was inundated, fielding calls from allies, constituents, and even a few nervous party leaders. Some urged him to hit back hard to show Schiff he couldn't be silenced. "Give him hell," Senator one advisor said, his voice brimming with urgency. Others counseled restraint, warning that a fiery response could play into Schiff's narrative of division. "Don't let him drag you into a shouting match," a senior aide cautioned. Kennedy listened, his expression calm, but his eyes sharp, as he leafed through a stack of letters from voters. One from a Shreveport small business owner read, "Don't let them shut you up, Senator. We're counting on you to keep it real." Another from a nurse in New Orleans said, "Your voice cuts through the noise in this crazy world. Keep it loud." The words anchored him, a reminder of why he'd entered politics, not for the spotlight, but for the people who trusted him to speak truth to power. By nightfall, the story had grown legs running wild across the nation. Cable news shows dissected Schiff's words, pundits debating Kennedy's next move with feverish intensity. On MSNBC, an analyst predicted Kennedy won't stay quiet. He's too stubborn, too principled for that. On a Louisiana radio station, a caller declared Schiff just woke the wrong senator. Kennedy's got fire in his belly. In homes across the country, families gathered around their TVs discussing the drama over dinner. In a St. Louis suburb, a mother named Karen turned to her husband. Her fork paused mid-air. Kennedy's got to say something, right? You can't let that slide. Her husband, slicing his steak, nodded slowly. He will, but it'll be smart, not just noise. That's Kennedy's way. The anticipation was electric, a nation holding its breath, waiting to see if Kennedy would answer Schiff's challenge or let it stand uncontested. Kennedy, alone in his office, now stood and walked to the window, the Capitol's dome glowing under the night sky like a beacon. The city hummed below, oblivious to the storm brewing in his mind. He thought of his constituents, farmers toiling in the Louisiana sun, teachers shaping young minds, small business owners scraping by. Schiff's call for silence wasn't just a personal jab. It was an attack on their right to be heard, their right to a voice in the halls of power. He turned back to his desk, picking up a pen and a legal pad, his movements deliberate. "All right," he said to his chief of staff, who'd lingered in the doorway, sensing the shift in his boss's mood. "We're not staying quiet, but we're doing this my way." The aide nodded, catching the glint of determination in Kennedy's eyes. He began jotting down notes, each word chosen with care. A spark of the truth he wanted to share. The nation was watching, waiting, and Kennedy knew it. His response would have to be more than a comeback. It would have to be a stand for the soul of democracy, a defense of the right to speak freely. The stage was set, the fuse lit by Schiff's challenge now burning bright. From the bayous of Louisiana to the skyscrapers of New York, people sensed this wasn't just about two senators, it was about the heart of debate, the freedom to speak truth without fear. Would Kennedy answer? How would he answer? No one knew for sure. But America was ready to listen, their ears tuned to the voice of a man who'd never been afraid to call it like he saw it. John Kennedy sat alone in his Baton Rouge office, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. The hum of the air conditioner was the only sound, a faint counterpoint to the storm raging in his mind. Adam Schiff's call for his silence still echoed a challenge that had set the nation buzzing. Kennedy wasn't one to rush into a fight, but he also wasn't one to back down. His desk, cluttered with legal pads and dog-eared books, bore the marks of a man who thought deeply before speaking. A single-framed photo of a Louisiana bayou sat beside a stack of letters from constituents, their words urging him to stand firm. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers' steepled eyes fixed on the ceiling. Schiff's words weren't just an attack on him, they were an attack on the idea that every voice mattered, no matter how blunt or inconvenient. Kennedy knew he had to respond, but it had to be right. It had to be him, sharp, honest, and unmistakably Louisiana. Outside, the world was anything but quiet. The nation was still reeling from Schiff's Senate floor demand, the headlines unrelenting. In a New Orleans coffee shop, a group of retirees debated over steaming mugs. "Kennedy's got to say something," said one. A former mechanic named Roy, his voice gruff. "You don't tell a senator to shut up and expect him to just take it." His friend, a librarian named Clara, shook her head. "He needs to be careful. Schiff's playing the unity card, and that's a tough one to counter." Across the country in a Seattle bookstore, a young clerk named Aisha scrolled through Twitter where #KennedySpeaks was still trending. "He's got to clap back," she told a customer pointing at her phone. But knowing Kennedy, it'll be smart, not just loud. The customer nodded, flipping through a newspaper, with Schiff's words splashed across the front page. I just hope he doesn't let it slide. We need his voice. Back in Kennedy's office, his team was in overdrive. Aides darted in and out, their phones buzzing with messages from reporters, allies, and constituents. One aide, a young staffer named Emily, dropped a stack of printouts on his desk, news articles, social media posts, and emails from voters. "They're all waiting." "Senator," she said, her voice urgent, "your supporters want you to fight back. They're saying Schiff's trying to muzzle free speech." Kennedy glanced at the stack, his eyes catching a letter from a teacher in Shreveport. "Your words give us courage, Senator. Don't let them silence you." Another from a fisherman in Houma read, "Speak for us, not just for yourself." The words hit home, grounding him in the responsibility he carried. He wasn't just fighting for his own voice, he was fighting for theirs. Kennedy's chief of staff, a seasoned advisor named Paul, leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed. "We've got to craft a response, John," he said, his voice steady but firm. "But it can't just be a rebuttal. It's got to be bigger about what this country stands for." Kennedy nodded, his mind already turning over phrases, testing them for weight and clarity. He wasn't interested in a shouting match. Schiff wanted unity fine. Kennedy would show what real unity looked like, not silencing dissent, but embracing it, wrestling with it, learning from it. He pulled a legal pad closer and began jotting down ideas, his handwriting sharp and deliberate. "Freedom ain't free," he scribbled, a phrase he'd heard from a constituent years ago. "And neither is the truth." He paused, a faint smile tugging at his lips. That was the kind of line that could stick, the kind that could cut through the noise. The pressure was mounting from every angle. In Washington, reporters kept up their vigil outside Kennedy's Senate office, their questions growing louder. "Will you respond to Schiff, Senator?" one shouted as an aide hurried past. "Are you planning a speech?" another called, her camera flashing. On cable news, Pundits dissected the standoff. A CNN analyst warned Kennedy's got to tread carefully. Schiff's framing this as a call for civility, and that's a powerful narrative. On a Louisiana talk radio show, a caller was less diplomatic. "Schiff thinks he can shut Kennedy up. He's got another thing coming." In a Chicago classroom, a civics teacher showed her students the clip of Schiff's statement, sparking a heated debate. "Kennedy should ignore it," said one student, a quiet boy in the back. "Don't give Schiff the attention." A girl in the front row disagreed. "No, he's got to speak. If he doesn't, it's like admitting Schiff's right." The teacher nodded, letting the debate unfold, sensing the moment was bigger than one senator's words. Kennedy's phone buzzed with a text from his wife Becky, back in Louisiana. "You know what you need to say," it read. "Just be you." He smiled, setting the phone down. Becky had always been his anchor, the one who reminded him to stay true to himself. He thought of their conversations on their porch, the crickets singing in the distance, where they'd talk about the kind of country they wanted for their kids. That was what this was about. Not just Schiff's challenge, but the idea that every American deserved a voice, no matter how small their town or how loud their critics. He stood and paced the room, his boots clicking softly on the floor. He wasn't a man for grand gestures, but he knew the power of words. He'd seen it in courtrooms, in town halls, in the stories of folks who'd stopped him on the street to share their struggles. Words could build bridges or burn them down, and Kennedy was determined to build. His team gathered that evening, a small war room of trusted aides and advisors. Paul spread out a whiteboard, scribbling key points: free speech, truth, democracy. Emily chimed in, reading from a tablet. The polls are showing people are split. Half think Schiff's right about unity. Half think you're the voice of reason. Kennedy listened, his eyes scanning the room. "This ain't about polls," he said, his voice low but firm. "It's about what's right. Schiff thinks silence is unity. He's got it backward. Unity comes from hashing it out, not shutting it down." The room nodded, the energy shifting. They began drafting the speech, Kennedy tossing out lines that mixed humor and gravitas. "Some folks think the truth is a swamp monster scary, till you look it in the eye," he said, testing the phrase. Emily laughed. "That's you, Senator." "That's the one." Outside, the nation's pulse quickened. In a Kansas City diner, a group of truckers watched the news over plates of pancakes. "Kennedy's got to hit back one," said his fork, waving. "Schiff's acting like he owns the Senate." His buddy sipping coffee disagreed. "Maybe Kennedy should let it go. Fighting just makes more noise." In a Miami bookstore, a young mother named Sophia showed her teenage son a clip of Schiff's statement on her phone. "What do you think?" she asked. Her son, barely looking up, said, "Kennedy's gonna talk. He always does. And it's gonna be good." The anticipation was palpable from small-town bars to big-city classrooms. People weren't just waiting for a response, they were waiting for Kennedy to remind them what it meant to stand up and speak out. Back in Baton Rouge, Kennedy tested his words aloud, pacing the office as the sun dipped below the horizon. He wanted the speech to feel like a conversation, like he was sitting across from a voter in a diner, not preaching from a podium. He tried a line, "In Louisiana, we don't hush folks when they speak their mind. We listen, even if it's messy." He paused, scratching it out, then tried again. "Democracy's like a gumbo. You don't make it by leaving out the spice." That one felt right, a mix of humor and truth that could resonate from Shreveport to Chicago. His aides nodded, scribbling notes, but Kennedy wasn't done. He wanted every word to count, to cut through the fog of politics and reach the people who felt ignored. Schiff's call for silence had given him an opening not to attack, but to teach, to remind America what debate was for. The pressure wasn't just external. Inside, Kennedy wrestled with doubts. Was this the right fight? Would his words heal or divide? He thought of his father, a man who'd taught him that truth was worth standing for, even when it cost you. He thought of the voters who'd stopped him at gas stations, their eyes tired but hopeful, asking him to keep fighting. He picked up a letter from a single mother in Monroe. "Your voice makes me feel like someone's listening. Don't stop." He set it down, his resolve hardening. This wasn't about ego, it was about duty. Schiff could call for silence, but Kennedy knew silence was the enemy of progress. He needed to speak not just for himself, but for every American who'd ever felt their voice didn't matter. By night's end, the speech was taking shape. Kennedy sat with his team, the room lit by a single lamp, papers scattered across the desk. Paul read a draft aloud, pausing at a line. "You don't fix a divided country by telling folks to hush. You fix it by listening, arguing, and finding the truth together." Kennedy nodded, a spark in his eyes. "That's it," he said. "That's what we're saying," Emily added. "Let's make it National Senator. A TV address straight to the people." Kennedy leaned back, considering. A broadcast would cut through the noise, let him speak directly to the country. No filters, no spin. "All right," he said, his voice steady. "Let's do it. But it's gotta be real. No fluff, no nonsense." The room buzzed with purpose, the team sensing this was more than a speech. It was a moment that could shift the conversation. The nation, unaware of Kennedy's late-night work, kept the pressure on. In a Philadelphia bar, patrons debated over beers, the TV replaying Schiff's words. "Kennedy's got to answer," said one. "A construction worker named Mike. He's the only one who says it like it is." In a Los Angeles classroom, a teacher asked her students what Kennedy should do. A shy girl raised her hand. He should remind people why we have free speech. It's not just for him, it's for all of us. The words echoed Kennedy's own thoughts, a reminder that this fight was bigger than one senator. As the night deepened, Kennedy stood at his office window, the lights of Baton Rouge twinkling below. He wasn't just preparing a speech, he was preparing to defend an idea, one that had defined America from its founding. The nation was waiting, and Kennedy was ready to deliver. The announcement came like a bolt from the blue, spreading faster than a Louisiana thunderstorm. John Kennedy would deliver a nationally televised address from a modest studio in Baton Rouge. No pomp, no crowd, just a man and a message. Newsrooms scrambled, producers shouting across studio floors to clear schedules, anchors rehearsing lead-ins with a mix of excitement and nerves. In homes from Portland to Pittsburgh, families set their clocks sensing this wasn't just another speech, it was a moment. Social media buzzed with anticipation, hashtags like #KennedySpeaks and #Voice of Truth trending before a single word was spoken. In a New Orleans diner, a waitress named Carla turned up the TV, her customers pausing mid-bite. "This is gonna be good," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. A trucker at the counter nodded. Kennedy's got a way of saying what we're all thinking. The nation was ready, waiting for a voice to cut through the noise. Inside the studio, the setup was simple. A wooden desk, a bookshelf lined with well-worn volumes, and a single lamp casting a warm glow. Kennedy sat calmly, his suit crisp but unpretentious, his notes stacked neatly before him. His chief of staff, Paul, gave a final nod from behind the camera. "You've got this senator," he said. Kennedy flashed a half-smile, his eyes steady. "Let's hope the folks out there think so." The technician counted down 5, 4, 3, and the red light blinked on. At exactly 8:00 p.m., the feed cut in Kennedy's face, filling screens across America. He looked directly into the camera, his voice low, deliberate, carrying the familiar cadence of a Louisiana storyteller. "Good evening," he began. "I wasn't planning to be here tonight, but when someone tells you to be quiet in a democracy, you don't just nod and walk away, you speak up." The words landed like a hammer, steady but sharp. Millions leaned closer to their TVs, their phones, their radios. Kennedy's tone wasn't angry. It was calm, almost conversational, but every syllable carried weight. "This country wasn't built by silencing voices," he said, leaning slightly forward. "It was built by listening, arguing, and sometimes disagreeing loud enough to shake the rafters. That's not division, that's democracy." In a Chicago living room, a family of 4 sat in silence, their eyes glued to the screen. "He's not even mentioning Schiff," whispered the father, a mechanic named Dan, "but you know exactly who he's talking about." His teenage daughter nodded, texting her friends, "Kennedy's killing it." In a Seattle bar, patrons set down their drinks, the room quieting as subtitles ran across the muted TV. "That's how you do it," one said, a carpenter named Luis. "No yelling, just truth." Kennedy's speech wove humor and wisdom with the skill of a bayou preacher. "Some folks think the truth is like a swamp monster, scary, till you look it in the eye," he said, a faint grin breaking through. The line drew chuckles in homes and bars, but it was more than a quip. It was a challenge. He continued, "You don't fix a divided country by telling folks to hush. You fix it by listening, by wrestling with the hard stuff, by finding the truth together. That's what we do in Louisiana, and that's what we should do in America." The words hit deep, resonating with people who'd grown weary of shouting matches and sound bites. In a Kansas City classroom, a teacher paused her lesson to stream the speech, her students whispering in awe. "He makes it sound so simple," one said, a shy girl named Emma. "Like we could actually talk to each other again." The speech wasn't long, but every line was deliberate, crafted to cut through the fog of politics. Kennedy leaned into his roots, drawing on stories of Louisiana folks, farmers, teachers, fishermen, who'd taught him the value of plain talk. "I met a man in Houma once," he said, his voice softening. "He told me, 'Senator, don't sugarcoat it. Tell us what's what.' That's what I'm doing tonight. Not for me, but for every American who's ever felt their voice didn't count." In a Miami diner, a waitress named Sophia wiped a tear, her customers nodding along. "That's why we love him," she said to no one in particular. "He talks like he's sitting right here with us." The speech wasn't just a response to Schiff. It was a call to remember what democracy demanded: courage, honesty, and a willingness to listen. Social media exploded as Kennedy spoke, clips circulating before he'd even finished. The line about the swamp monster went viral, memes sprouting like Spanish moss. One showed Kennedy grinning, with the caption, "When they tell you to shut up, but you've got truth on your side." Another? A video snippet of him saying, "Democracy's like a gumbo. You don't make it by leaving out the spice," racked up millions of views. On Twitter, #Kennedy Speaks overtook #Schiff silences, with users posting, "This is what leadership sounds like," and Kennedy just reminded us why we fight for free speech. Even those who disagreed with his politics couldn't deny the impact. In a Dallas barbershop, a customer named Marcus, usually skeptical of politicians, leaned back in his chair. "I don't always agree with the guy, but that was real," he said. The barber nodded, clipping away. He didn't even raise his voice. "That's power." Kennedy's words rippled beyond living rooms and bars, reaching places where politics rarely tread. In a rural Ohio church, a pastor jotted down quotes for his next sermon, struck by Kennedy's call to listen even when it's hard. In a San Francisco coffee shop, a group of tech workers debated over lattes, one saying, "He's right, silencing people doesn't solve anything. It just buries the problem." The speech was a masterclass in tone, blending humor with conviction, never stooping to personal attacks. Kennedy didn't need to name Schiff. Every word was a rebuke not of one man, but of the idea that silence could ever be the answer. In a New York classroom, a high school teacher paused the broadcast to ask her students, "What stands out to you?" A boy in the back raised his hand. "He's not fighting dirty. He's just steady, like he believes what he's saying." His classmate nodded. "It makes you want to listen." As Kennedy neared the end, he leaned closer to the camera, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "No one, not a senator, not a president, not anyone should be afraid of the truth. It's messy, it's loud, but it's ours. And if we lose it, we lose what makes America, America." The words hung in the air, a quiet challenge that felt louder than any shout. He closed simply, "I believe in this country. I believe in you. Good night." The screen faded to black, but the silence that followed was electric. In homes across the nation, people sat stunned, some clapping softly, others lost in thought. In a Denver living room, a mother named Lisa turned to her husband. "That wasn't just a speech," she said. "That was a reminder of what we're supposed to be." Her husband nodded, still staring at the TV. He didn't just answer Schiff. He answered all of us. The impact was immediate, undeniable. Newsrooms scrambled to keep up, anchors stumbling over superlatives. Kennedy's speech resonates nationwide, read an NBC headline. The Washington Post declared Kennedy's calm defense of free speech steals the spotlight. Even conservative outlets, often critical of Senate theatrics, acknowledged the moment. A Texas paper ran, "Kennedy reminds America what debate looks like." On a Milwaukee talk radio show, a host usually skeptical of politicians admitted, "You may not like his style, but tonight, Kennedy sounded like the grown-up in the room." Clips of the speech dominated social media, the swamp monster line quoted in everything from late-night monologues to church bulletins. In a Los Angeles bar, patrons raised their glasses, one shouting, "To Kennedy for keeping it real." The room cheered, the mood lighter than it had been in days. The speech wasn't just a moment, it was a movement. In a Baton Rouge community center, a group of organizers replayed the broadcast, pausing to discuss Kennedy's call for open debate. "He's right," said one, a young activist named Tamika. "We don't need less talking. We need more the honest kind." In a Chicago classroom, students scribbled down quotes, one taping the gumbo line to her notebook. "It's like he's talking to us, not at us," she told her teacher. Even abroad, the speech made waves. A London headline read, "American Senator's Defense of Free Speech Echoes Globally." In Berlin, a paper noted, "Kennedy's voice recalls a time when debate was America's strength." The world was watching, and Kennedy's words were carrying further than anyone expected. Back in Washington, Schiff's team watched in silence, the air heavy with the realization that Kennedy had shifted the narrative. The senator himself, usually composed, paced his office, muttering about the need to respond. But the nation wasn't focused on him anymore. Kennedy's voice was everywhere, from diner TVs to dorm room laptops. In a Philadelphia bar, a group of friends replayed the speech on a phone, one saying, "He didn't just defend himself, he defended all of us." The bartender nodded, pouring a drink. "That's what makes it hit so hard." The speech had done more than answer Schiff's challenge. It had ignited a national conversation about what democracy meant, what it demanded. Kennedy had taken the stage, not with anger, but with clarity, and America was listening. John Kennedy's speech didn't just end when the camera faded to black. It ignited a fire that burned across America, its glow lingering in places far beyond the Baton Rouge studio. By morning, his words were everywhere, replayed on morning news, quoted in coffee shops, and shared in viral clips that flooded social media. The line about democracy being like a gumbo needing spice to thrive had become a rallying cry, printed on T-shirts, scrawled on protest signs, and whispered in classrooms. From small-town diners to city lecture halls, people weren't just talking about Kennedy's response to Adam Schiff. They were talking about what it meant to speak freely, to stand firm, to listen even when it hurt. The speech had become a cultural touchstone, a moment that reminded a divided nation of its own resilience. In a New Orleans diner, the breakfast rush paused as Carla the waitress turned up the TV. A news anchor replayed Kennedy's closing line, "No one should be afraid of the truth. It's messy, but it's ours." A trucker named Ray, sipping coffee, nodded. "That's why Kennedy's different," he said. "He talks like he's one of us, not above us." Across the counter, a teacher named Sarah agreed, her eyes bright. "It's not just about him. It's about all of us having a voice." In a Chicago classroom, students debated the speech's impact, one taping the gumbo quote to her binder. "It makes you think," she told her teacher. "Why do we let people shout each other down when we could just talk?" The question hung in the air, echoing in homes and workplaces where Kennedy's calm conviction had struck a chord. The speech's reach went beyond politics, seeping into the fabric of everyday life. In a rural Ohio church, a pastor wove Kennedy's words into his sermon, pairing them with scripture about truth and courage. "When a man says democracy thrives on listening, that's not just politics," he told his congregation. "That's faith in action." In a Seattle bookstore, a group of young professionals gathered for a book club, but the conversation turned to Kennedy. He didn't attack. "Schiff," said Aisha, the clerk setting down her coffee. "He just reminded us what debate's supposed to be." Her friend nodded, flipping through a magazine with Kennedy's face on the cover. It's like he opened a window and let some air in. Even abroad, international papers took note. A London headline read, "American Senator's Defense of Free Speech Resonates." In Tokyo, a columnist wrote, "Kennedy's voice recalls an America built on open dialogue." Schiff, meanwhile, was scrambling. In his California office, he watched the news with a tight jaw, his aides exchanging nervous glances. The senator had expected Kennedy's response to be fiery, easy to dismiss as divisive. Instead, Kennedy's calm, principled stand had shifted the narrative, leaving Schiff's call for silence looking petty by comparison. He drafted a statement released to little fanfare, doubling down on his plea for unity. "We need less rhetoric, not more," it read. But the words fell flat, drowned out by Kennedy's. On CNN, an analyst noted Schiff miscalculated. Kennedy didn't just defend himself, he redefined the conversation. In a Dallas bar, patrons laughed as they read Schiff's response on a news ticker. "He's trying to keep up," said one, a mechanic named Luis. But Kennedy's already won. The contrast was stark. Schiff's statement, polished but defensive, couldn't match the raw authenticity of Kennedy's speech. Social media amplified the difference with clips of Kennedy's gumbo line outpacing Schiff's response 10-1. On Twitter, a user posted, "Kennedy spoke to the heart." Schiff's just playing catch-up. Another wrote, "You can't silence a man who speaks for the people." The hashtags #Kennedy speaks and #voice of truth dominated, while Schiff's narrative faded into the background. In a Philadelphia community center, organizers replayed Kennedy's speech for a youth group, one saying, "This is what leadership looks like, not shutting people up, but lifting them up." The kids nodded, one scribbling Kennedy's words in a notebook. "The truth is ours." Kennedy's impact wasn't just in the moment, it was in the conversations it sparked. In a Kansas City diner, a group of retirees debated over pancakes. "Kennedy's right," said one, a former farmer named Roy. "You don't fix a country by telling folks to be quiet. You fix it by talking it out." His friend disagreed, citing Schiff's point about division, but even he admitted Kennedy's got a way of making you think. In a Miami classroom, a teacher used the speech to discuss rhetoric, her students analyzing its tone. "It's not angry," said a boy in the back. "It's strong because it's calm." His classmate added, "It's like he's talking to us, not at us." The speech had become a teaching tool, a reminder that words could unite as much as they could divide. Kennedy's speech was never about scoring points, but about defending democracy itself, the belief that every voice, no matter how small, deserves to be heard. His words rippled across the country. Fishermen in Baton Rouge toasted him, office workers in New York shared his clips at lunch, and parents, teachers, and pastors passed his message on. For many, he became a rare mirror of what they longed for in leadership, honesty, steadiness, and courage, without anger. Back home in Louisiana, Kennedy summed it up quietly to a friend. "It's not about me, it's about reminding folks they've got a right to be heard." That truth stuck. His stand did more than answer Schiff. It reignited faith that strength lies not in silencing, but in listening, in speaking truth with clarity, and in building unity through open dialogue. His words remain a call to action. Your voice matters. Speak it with truth, listen with courage, and help shape a democracy where silence never wins.